Today I'm going to show you how I decorated these football cake pops. Come join me. After baking this chocolate cake along with a bunch of other cakes at the same time, I made this into chocolate peanut butter cake pops. So after I made the inside of the cake pops, I shaped them into football shapes. I did this just by kind of massaging them and shaping them slowly, thicker in the center, more pointed at the sides, and I just did this over time each one. When I felt like the dough was a little bit too dry, I used a little bit of icing and just kind of rubbed it along the outside of the cake pop ball. After I was finished with that, I started to prep my chocolate to be dipped. I used peanut butter chips to melted those down, and then I also used some red chocolate that I had previously dyed. I used that to mix this so that I could dye my chocolate an appropriate brown for the football. So I used this red and then also mixed in some blue oil-based color and yellow oil-based color, and eventually kind of mixing those together I was able to get to the brown color that I was looking for to coat these as footballs. After I got the correct color, I used that chocolate, dipped each one of my sticks into that chocolate and stuck them into the balls and left them sit a bit so that the sticks won't come out of the cake balls. After they sat for a little bit, I was ready to begin dipping. I dipped them and just kind of tapped on the side to get that excess chocolate off. Then I ran my finger along the stick to just kind of clean up the stick a little bit so they weren't messy. Then I began to work on the fondant that I would be using to stick the logos onto. So I started with rolling that out and really just kind of flattening it out and cutting this, preparing to cut this into strips. Then I used a pair of scissors that have multiple different blades on them just to kind of cut it into some thin strips. I needed to cut them into some longer and then some shorter strips so that I can create the laces that go onto a football. And that's what I'm doing here, just kind of cutting those two different lengths. These are the longer ones, and then these ones to the side are the shorter ones. And after I finished that, I used some piping gel and I glued with that gel that center long piece. And then I used those smaller pieces and used the gel to put 3 onto each one of the cake pops. And now we have the laces completed. After I finished those, I was prepared to move to the next step. So I printed out with an edible printer some edible images that have the logos for the Buffalo Bills and the Los Angeles Rams. Then I used some fondant and just rolled that out. Went back to my edible images and prepared to cut those out so that I could begin working with them. So I cut each one of the logos. I had 2 different sizes. I didn't know which size I was going to use. Ended up using the smaller size. So I cut each one of those out into smaller circle shapes to be used later. Now I'm cutting the fondant into some strips. I'm going to cut them into small squares. And here's where I'm actually cutting those logos out. Once I get those cut out, I'm going to take off the backing from each one of these edible images, and I'm going to adhere them to these fondant squares that I've cut out. So I'm using a little bit of water to stick those to each one of the squares. Again, a little bit of water, and then I'm going to take the backing off of this edible image and stick that to the square. After I have all of these completed, I'll go back and I will cut out the circle shape from the fondant now that these edible images are stuck onto. Of course, here I'm working on the Bills logo. Here I am actually cutting out those logos from the fondant, and it is wet because I just put water on it, so it does stick to the scissors, so it's a little bit of a slower process here. And now I'm cutting out those Los Angeles Rams logos. I'm going to go through the same process. Once they're cut out, I'm going to go back and I'm going to stick each one of them onto one of these squares after taking the plastic backing off of the edible image. And again, that's just water that I'm using to stick that to the fondant. And I used, you'll see I did do one Steelers one because Steelers is my team, and I'm going to include it along with these Cakepops. Be an extra one for the person to enjoy. I'm cutting out the Los Angeles Rams logos from the fondant. Again, it is sticky because it's wet with water. And cutting out that Steelers one. And now it's time to begin sticking these onto the Cakepops. So I'm using a little bit of piping gel and putting that onto the back of each one of those pieces of fondant, and I'm sticking that to the side of each one of these football-shaped Cakepops. I'm looking at each of the two sides to see which of them it would be best covered up, and that's where I'm putting the edible image. So here I started to just put the piping gel on several of them and then kind of setting them aside, and that was so that it got a little more tacky. It allowed it to stick better to each of the Cakepops. And I'm just pushing down the edges of each one of these, and you'll see me in some of them possibly kind of just pushing the sides up a little bit to clean up the edges, because as you're pushing them down, it does push the fondant out from under the edible image. So that's what I'm doing there. So after I was finished with the Buffalo Bills, this is what they looked like. So we have the logo onto the football Cakepops. And then I began to pack those up. So I put those into the bags and just wrap those with a twisty tie. After I had the Buffalo Bills ones done, I went back and began to put piping gel onto the back of each of the pieces of fondant for the Rams. And again, I checked either side of these Cakepops to put this on the side that would be best covered with the logo. I adhered it and then just pushed along the sides along the edges of those logos. And there I am putting the Steelers one on. And here's what the Rams cake pops look like. After they were finished, I went back and I started to pack those up, again putting those into the little baggies and sealing those with a twist tie. And packing up that Steelers one. And here's what that one looked like, and it's my favorite. And this is what they look like at the final. Thank you so much for coming to join me. I do appreciate you joining me. Please come back, like, comment, and share, and join me for other videos.